And so welcome to Active Truffle Cafe on the 4th of March 2025. Our guest tonight is Tim Burns from Sustrans, who's going to be talking about the Walking and Cycling Index for Children. It's a great topic. Children often not getting their say in consultations, so it's good to have a survey which will give them a voice. And we will, as usual before that, start with the news from around the country, provided by you, our audience. And where shall we start with that today? Let's start from Andy, with Andy in Wiltshire. Andy, what do you have for us?
Hi everyone. Just wanted to update everyone on the we've had the A36 closed in Wiltshire for about 9 months. That's now reopened with one lane. It's been a bit tricky initially, if you recall, around August, September last year. Cyclists couldn't actually get through the roads around there because the cars were so congested. There wasn't even any space for cyclists or pedestrians. A lot of pedestrians were getting barged off the footpath there with selfish drivers. That all changed a little bit with the one-way system. That's now open. Interesting thing is it's been in the national media last few days. There's a campaign to create a pedestrian crossing across the A36 to join up to neighbourhoods and also reduce the speed limit. National Highways have said that they probably can't do that, but there is a petition. I will try and dig out the link and share that in the chat if anyone's interested. But yeah, that's a step in the right direction, I think. But unfortunately, I'm not on Facebook. My wife is, and she was telling me how horrible some of the responses were to that petition and those campaigners and those news articles in the media this week about an A36 pedestrian crossing. So yeah, that's one for me.
Okay, thanks, Andy. That doesn't sound too great. Good luck with that. Okay, let's move to Rob. Where are you calling in from, Rob?
Hi, I'm in Shrewsbury. We've got, I think I told some of you before, a Ghent style circulation plan in the design. I can see Adam nodding, being involved a little bit here and there. On the 20th of March and the 21st of March, we're holding a full conference, a one-day conference. It launches on Thursday evening with Peter Walker from The Guardian, Melissa Bruntlett from Delft, Phil Jones from PJA Associates. So a really good lineup. That's £8 a ticket. And on the Friday, there's a completely free conference with people from Hampshire of England and Living Street and others. I'll put these in the chat. It should be a really good couple of days. On the weekend, there's going to be a festival in town all around movement. So if people want to come to Shrewsbury for 3 or 4 days and enjoy meeting people, I think there's a lot of people signed up already, but I'll put it in the chat.
That's great. That sounds really worth going to. Thanks, Rob. I hope it goes well. H, what have you got for us? Hello? You're still muted.
All right, that's got it.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I've put something in the chat. Closing tomorrow, in theory, LNER are consulting about the 10 new trains they're getting from CAF to extend their fleet. And I've just got the consultation document about the bike space. There's a good point. They've actually taken seats out the saloon. There's a bad point. They're still hanging the bloody things up. And we can actually improve on that a lot. So in the chat, there's the link to the consultation document. You can see what a hideous picture it is. And I'm able to sort of do commentary if you want it, but definitely don't hang up. We can actually use the thing. And the company that owns the train, Porterbrook, was actually responsible for the Class 455 in 2002 and the ScotRail bicycle coach, which came out in 2023, which were excellent. So why can't they get this right?
Okay, thanks for that. So there's a consultation link we can follow there, which sounds good. We have had, I can tell you, a lot of consultations come out in Oxfordshire in the last week or two. I think it is, in fact, I know it's the officers trying to get them out before the pre-election window for May the 1st. And then I presume the councillors all go campaigning and the officers sit down with the consultation responses in peace and quiet for a few weeks. And hope that the new administration still thinks the proposals are all still relevant. Anyway, Adam from more North Somerset than Bath, but
just wanted to kind of raise an interesting thing that's happening as part of the West of England combined authority sort of elections, which is we've already seen the mayor, who's Labour, at the behest of the Labour candidate, cancel a £90 million bus and cycle link between Bristol and Bath, which is just because of a slight issue over a bus lane on a dual carriageway. And then the most recent one is we've seen the Conservative candidate come out aggressively against things like low traffic neighbourhoods and oppose them and everything. So you have two different candidates, all with their responsibility for sustainable travel, going hard in against actually making that useful. So the joys of politics is, unfortunately, I don't understand why sustainable travel is so politically problematic, but here we are.
Yeah, the strategy that worked so well for Rishi Sunak is coming to haunt us, and I think we have to try and ask the candidates some searching questions. Chris from Kirklees.
Yeah, hi. So just a couple of quick things to update on. One is that I had a conversation with our councillor who's currently leading on transport a few weeks ago, and he mentioned something about funding for Tranche 5 for some canal towpaths that were getting done. I said, no, that's Tranche 4, isn't it? Like, no, I think we've applied for it for Tranche 5. So I've recently found out after Tranche 5 got announced that it's the same towpaths that are being funded by 4 and 5 for the same work. So 5 is just covering up the costs. And nothing new is getting done, which is a little bit disappointing because there's lots that they can be doing for us. And then the other thing is, today, Kirklees have launched their consultation on the new local transport plan, which has come out before the West Yorkshire transport plan's gone out to consultation, because they wanted to do their own little thing on the side that apparently has got pretty much the same stuff in it, but they're doing their own consultation earlier than West Yorkshire. So I'm writing up a review that I'm going to hopefully post online to advise people on how to respond to that soon.
Okay, thanks. I'm not sure about the Tranche 4, Tranche 5 issue. I think that is probably a local one. But the newer funding that's come out for 25-26, that seems to be awarded to councils not on the basis of specific bids, but money that the councils could then effectively spend, probably in consultation with Active Travel England, but not having to bid for it before they get the allocation. But it's an interesting view of localism from obviously very independent Kirklees Council. Mark, how are things in Brighton? Apart from sunny, I can see.
No, actually, I just wanted to clarify what you just said. So my understanding is the funding is based on some formula, which somebody will tell us the detail, but the formula is the population affected by the capability rating.
Right.
So, and it is formula based. So if you're the same population and you were 3, you'd get, I don't know if it's 3 times as much as a 1. There's no zeros anymore. So that's, and it's not 5, it's 25, 26, although people might call it 5, just to be petty.
Right. That
But that does mean that obviously raising your council's capability rating will have an impact of getting more money, because you're not going to double your population, but you could improve the rating.
That very much figures. Good. Any more news? No? In which case, let's go for Tim and the Children's Cycling and Walking Index. Over to you, Tim.
Thanks, Robin. Hopefully you can all hear me. I'm in an open plan office, so there might be the occasional background chatter as people start to drift off home and church bells in the background from Bristol Cathedral, etc. But hopefully it's working okay. I will share my screen. I've got a very short slide deck to just run us through things. So let me just get that set up. Just popping it onto slide share. Robin, can you just nod or something to let me know
yes.
It's okay?
Yep, that's come through perfectly.
Smash it. Okay, cool. So thanks for the invitation. Lovely to be here today. So my name's Tim Burns. I basically lead policy across Sustrans, working out of Bristol, but mainly in England. The reason I'm here today is basically to talk about the Children's Walking and Cycling Index, which is, I guess, a bit of an offshoot from our main index program that you may be aware of. So, we've been delivering what was formerly Bike Life, that morphed into the Walking and Cycling Index in 2019, and it's still continuing today. The Walking and Cycling Index basically is an assessment of how cities across the UK and Ireland are developing walking, wheeling, cycling, active travel. It includes attitudes, it includes behaviours. We do modelling to understand the impact of that. And we also look a little at what the city is providing, or the place is providing, in terms of cycle routes, the number of streets that have lower speeds, that sort of stuff. So that it brings it all together, packages it up into a series of reports. We had an idea, it must have been early 2024, to basically repeat this, or to do it on a much smaller scale, but actually focus on children. And that idea is probably should have been done years ago, to be honest. But basically formulated the first ever Children's Walking and Cycling Index, sponsored by Halfords. So we got some funding, and we've basically just launched that. So last week we had we took over the APPG for walking and cycling in Parliament, and launched it to about 60 people. We had a couple of MPs standing that came in slightly too late to get seats, which is always a good sign of the popularity of the event. And then following that, on the Wednesday, we had the media launch, and that was picked up by national publications, trade press, including children's press, which was really positive to see. Newsround, First News, etc., covering it. And we also did quite a lot of media interviews, primarily with BBC Radio. The survey, it's basically a survey of representative of children aged 6 to 15. So 16 onwards is when the adult index kind of kicks in. So this is 6 to 15, surveyed with YouGov's Children and Parents Omnibus. And the idea is really to kind of basically start exploring. It's the same way that we use the adult index. So the adult index covers a lot of ground, but it doesn't go massively deep on those areas. And then we look at the kind of themes of what's going on and start to find research to explore those in more detail. So it's kind of an overview of what children think, how they currently behave, what they'd like to see, and it gives us that starting point to explore much more. It's probably worth also sharing that Sustrans is reviewing its strategy at the moment. We've got a new strategy launching later this year, and a big part of that is going to be children, not just the school journey, but very much starting with the school journey. So there's more to come on that very soon, and really kind of putting children as a group of individuals that obviously don't always get the limelight that they probably deserve. Children don't get to vote; they can be ignored sometimes by politicians. Children don't tend to respond to consultations or have, you know, an active say in how their neighborhood, how their local patch is developed. So, you know, one of the reasons for Sustrans of doing this work is to, you know, to raise children's voices in transport policy, in the agenda, and investment in how delivery happens. And that's reflected in terms of how children feel. So, you know, children were very positive in terms of the survey, in terms of the findings, but nearly half feel the government's not doing enough to help, you know, really kind of meet their needs. But they do want to walk, wheel, and cycle more, which was great to see through some of the results. How are children currently getting around? Well, you know, the positive news is most children walk, wheel, or scoot every day, which is really good to see. But about 54%, so over half of children are driven 5 or more days a week. So even though obviously children don't drive, they are driven around, and they are dependent upon presumably their parents and guardians primarily driving them to places, either for the child or as an accompaniment to journeys that obviously adults take. They do have the highest modal share of any age group for active travel though, which is really positive. And we saw that in another report that we released last year, I think it was, called Transport to Thrive, which looked at 16 to 25-year-olds. You know, it's this when we're looking at how do we increase walking, cycling, how do we provide genuine alternatives to car use, both children and young adults almost have a lot of that behavior already encapsulated in the way that they travel. It's not complete, it doesn't stand for all children or young people, but if you could mirror that way of transport across other generations, you'd go a long way towards increasing active travel across the board and reducing car use. So yeah, that's the modal share splits. The headline that we led with on this report was about a gender gap in cycling. So not surprisingly, it's been documented before. It continues, of course, into adulthood. Women tend to cycle, girls tend to cycle less than men and boys. Positively, almost half of children cycle at least once a week, which is great to see, and higher, as I said, than adults. But 30% don't cycle at all. Despite most of them wanting to, and that gender divide is really apparent. So only 17% of girls cycle 5 or more times a week in comparison to 28% of boys. In terms of how girls perceive themselves, only 8% describe themselves as someone that cycles often. So really low overall, and much higher, more than double that for boys. The good news stat is for both boys and girls. When we looked at how people would like to travel, how children would like to travel in the future, whilst most children want to drive a bit more, be driven a bit more, use public transport a bit more, walk, wheel a bit more, it was quite staggering how many wanted to cycle. So it was 50% for girls, 50% of girls want to cycle more, 51% of boys want to cycle more. So the really good piece of this puzzle is there's a ready-made audience. People, you know, children want to get on their bikes and cycle around more in the future. We need to unlock that for them as a sector, as campaigners, as professionals working in this space, through government, through investment, etc. That, you know, the next generation are up for it. We just need to support them by improving the environment and you know, improving culture around cycling. On the walking wheeling side, so you know, really positively, 2 out of 5 journeys made by children are by walking, wheeling, or scooting. So really high starting points. 80% of children support more crossings. 3 out of 4 support stopping cars or tackling pavement parking. So, you know, simple initiatives like side road crossings, pavement parking, etc., could help unlock that for children even further. Broadly very positive. There are some exceptions to that, just like the adult population. So for example, disabled children are less likely to walk or wheel on a regular basis in comparison to non-disabled children. So that access point of really improving the walking environment, so it's inclusive, is critical. In terms of the school journey, the vast majority of children support more traffic-free paths, clearer routes, support physically separated cycle paths, just as you'd expect, both from the point of view of the child and the point of view of the parent or guardian. Separating people cycling, children cycling from motor vehicles is absolutely critical if you're going to get the majority of people to do it. And that support is echoed from parents. So we included some data in the index, in the children's index from a parent point of view to really kind of round that in terms of the family. So yeah, one example of that is their support for LTNs. And just to finish off, I mean, I think it's quite shocking that only 36% of children think the government's doing enough to help them to be healthy, to help them to get physical activity, improve their well-being, get out and about, play outdoors, all of these aspects that you know, a lot of us were kind of used to and kind of took for granted, I guess, as we were growing up. You know, that intergenerational piece doesn't exist anymore, and children don't associate, you know, the outdoors with play all the time and being able to just mess around on their street. So yeah, there's a strong indication that we need to prioritize children and think about children's needs, bring children's views, their lived experience, their voices into that picture when we're talking about things like the next cycling and walking investment strategy, when we're talking about the potential for a roads safety strategy, or the national integrated transport strategy. So there's all these initiatives that are ongoing, and we're seeing these changes in policy and a lot more support from the current UK government and from local authorities. But we need to make sure that children are centred in that, I think, is the overarching message. And a lot of things that are going to benefit children clearly are going to benefit adults and others as well. So it's win-win, especially for families, of course. I can share out the presentation later if anyone wants it, and there's a link, but it's quite long to the Children's Walking and Cycling Index. So I suggest just searching for children's index and Sustrans, and you'll find it. Cool, thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Right, thank you very much, Tim, for that brief run through. And I should say we should put the link in the chat. I'm sure somebody will in a second. The report has got a lot more charts in it and discussion of the results. There's all kinds of interesting gems in there. I thought some of the demographic ones were quite interesting. I might ask you a bit about some of those. But there we are. Thank you, Tim. You've popped it in there. So Andy from Wiltshire asks that it says it's a really great point that children want to get out of cars and do more cycling, and often parents can be the blocker. He talks about the mistaken perception that the car is safer than active travel, and possibly he's talking about the overall health impacts of sedentary travel versus active travel. Maybe he wants to comment on that, or maybe just a general perception that cycling's dangerous, where in fact it's generally very safe. How can we change? The question is, how can we change that perception of danger or safety?
I mean, it's a huge question, right? And there are lots of things that clearly come into this. You know, we have a tendency, I think, in the active travel sector to think about safety as road safety, but of course, personal safety is also critical, especially from a parent's point of view, especially when we're talking about walking and wheeling as well as cycling. So I think you know, just gradually, perceptions around safety have changed over years, and there are a lot of factors that have kind of been included in that, in terms of not just the increase in use of cars, motor vehicles on our roads, but also in terms of how we consume information about what's going on, some of the risks, some of the dangers, etc. What other parents do, the policies of schools in terms of whether or not your child can walk to school independently, or whether they have to be accompanied and dropped off by an adult. All of those things, I think, kind of contribute to a parents and guardians experience of safety. I think it's probably no surprise that the children in the children's index perceive their environment to be safer than adults, including parents and guardians, perceive children's safety both on the walking and wheeling and the cycling sides in the adult index, which is interesting and fascinating in itself. And really kind of reflects that if you're going to solve these sorts of issues, you do need to think about it from a family dynamic, not just the child. Clearly, I mean, ultimately, yes, on the cycling side, until we've got networks that are more complete, that separate people from motor vehicles for day-to-day journeys, we're not going to get anywhere. For the walking side, it's like I say, a bit more complicated with that kind of personal safety dynamic, and whether the journey is at night or day, and whether they're with friends or on their own, will come into it. But certainly on the cycling side, I think we've got some really kind of, dare I say, quite straightforward solutions in terms of what needs to happen, whether that's school streets, traffic-free paths, on-road protected routes, lower speeds, LTNs, circulation plans, you name it. We know what the solutions are, and the challenge is how do we actually implement them in a way that is meaningful, that aligns with some of the huge budgetary pressures that governments are facing at the moment with everything else that's going on in the world. So yeah, it's great that demand is there, but it's facilitating that. And of course, there's other aspects and barriers that we didn't get into, but on the safety side, I think that's why I'd lean.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you whether there was anything that particularly surprised you in the research. So some of the things we know already, like kids want to cycle more. And you mentioned that the boy-girl split was known before. Was there anything that jumped out and you didn't expect to see?
I think that I mean, we know that children want to cycle more, but I don't think we ever knew the kind of extent. So if you compare, like 51% of children want to cycle more, whereas only 33% want to walk or wheel more. 28% want to take public transport more, and 26% want to be driven more. So it is quite staggering, that difference. It's almost 20% higher than any other mode, which I think is really helpful to the cycling agenda in particular, and showing that's where the barriers are greatest, that's where the opportunities are greatest, and it really kind of puts favour to certainly our work and supporting children to do that. The other surprises, I think there's some really interesting dynamics around primary versus secondary. I think I probably came into this thinking primary schools, they're close to where you live, everyone walks. Secondary schools, they're further away, so driving's going to increase significantly. That's not the case as according to this data. Broadly speaking, walking, wheeling, scooting, and cycling, secondary and primary, are quite similar according to the data that we've collected. The difference being that driving reduces a bit from primary to secondary, and public transport increases a bit. So actually, kids becoming more independent, taking more public transport trips, and the need for public transport solutions and availability, affordability to be in there is good. The driving side, I'm guessing, is parents dropping off before then trip chaining and going to other, to work and other destinations that might be further away, especially for primary. So there's some interesting stuff there. There's also some interesting stuff about lower socioeconomic groups, and how actually walking, wheeling, I think, and cycling behaviours are higher than for higher socioeconomic groups, and to not forget, especially on the walking wheeling side, that we often talk about increasing walking and wheeling being the ultimate goal, whereas actually I think it's more nuanced, and a lot of children have to walk and wheel because they don't have the choice to be driven around by their parents. It's about improving that experience and making sure that, because we also saw that perceptions of safety and perceptions of the quality of the environment for walking and wheeling are lower amongst lower socioeconomic groups. So they're doing it more, but it's not as good for them. So really kind of improving that experience when people don't have a choice and they have to travel on that mode is critical.
and we know from other data, I believe, that they're right in thinking that, because it is actually more dangerous to walk and wheel and cycle if you're in a lower income your bracket. If you're more deprived area, you are more likely to get in a collision, or air pollution is higher. So that's really interesting. So one of the things I like about this, I mentioned at the start, that the children are the voice that don't get asked in consultations, and this is I'm looking forward to using this data and dropping it into consultations responses or into counsellors' mailboxes every now and then. I suspect many of us will be doing the same. Mark from Brighton has a question along those lines. They're just starting on their local plan. He's been trying to get children's voices heard more, and any suggestions for using this data in that type of context?
That's the kind of day-to-day data, or the uses that we would prescribe for it. I mean, how we see the index, both the adults and children's, is more like almost like a data release. So the actual report doesn't have a series of recommendations. It's much more like a stats release, like akin to the NTS. It's there to be used by ourselves, by others, by our partners, etc. It's great if you quote Sustrans. It's great if you mention the index, but the primary thing that we want people to do is to use that data to back up, whether that's local, national influence in advocacy work, really kind of underpinning it. And of course the case studies as well. We've got videos and case studies from children in the report, which then brings that emotive side of the story. It's not just about reading the data, it's about connecting with a decision maker or with whoever's writing your local plan, etc. So kind of bringing children's voices to the fore, recognizing that they're important, is critical. But I think we've still got a long way to go, because as I say, they don't vote. It's quite easy to stand up and get the pictures with be in front of or with children and to listen, but actually specific design of policy, of schemes, of really understanding, for example, how many times do we evaluate how children are using the infrastructure that we're improving and providing for them, or for the general population, but from a children's lens, it's quite often missing. So building that evidence base as much as possible, and using the children's index alongside other statistics and lived context, I think is vital for influencing the local plan. But it's not what my day job to influence locally. So there might be others in the call that have also some really good advice.
Yes. So the next couple of questions are actually going from asking about the report to kind of more influencing specific types of infrastructure or other intervention that it could lead on to. So one is, there's two questions about routes to school and school streets. So school streets are talked about as one of the things that you very cleverly use words that describe a school street without calling it a school street. And yes, kids would love safe routes to school. How do you have insights into what the main obstacles are to introducing school streets, and how obviously using this kind of data can help to address that, but anything else you can talk around that with?
It's a good question. I mean, from the point of view of the journey to school, it's not going to do everything. So one of the things that we found out in the report was that about 33% of the journeys are journeys to school. There's a large portion of other journeys that we need to not forget. But the obvious starting point, which I think we've been trying to start for a long time, and we've had success, but it's not become, you don't look across the country and say every school has a relatively safe way of, certainly not cycling there, walk-in, wheel-in, sometimes it's mixed. School Streets is obviously a massive program that has increased in scale, in size. It's great to see that coming through. It's great to see so many schools commit to that, even though, you know, the use of volunteers and the use of temporary barriers, etc., is costly. It's not a long-term solution. I think we do need to be moving towards School Streets that have automatic barriers or number plate recognition, or ways that can do that takes away the kind of need for teachers, volunteers, parents to kind of police it in the future. But it's great to see that expanding, and I think, you know, it's hard to argue against School Streets. We time and time again we see overwhelming public support for it from parents and non-parents, and there are caveats within School Streets programs that enable, you know, people that are parked within those streets to come in and out sensibly when they need to. It has to be the journey though, and that's where I think it's beyond the school gate. It's got to be a kind of low traffic neighborhood, or how do you reduce traffic around school neighborhoods to really kind of tick the box from a kind of door-to-door journey. Low traffic neighborhoods need to go hand in hand with improvements to the neighborhoods as well. It can't just take away cars or free car access without improving the environment for walking and wheeling in particular. And we also need to not forget the schools that, you know, are on main roads where School Streets is not a viable option, and taking a more safe route to school that looks at crossings, that looks at, you know, key points and challenges along those journeys is critical. And there's some really good work in Ireland going on around safe routes to school, where you've got major funding and some really beautiful kind of I say beautiful, you know what I mean? It's like ambitious stuff that is transforming some of those key routes and environments.
Yeah, that's good. And I know we're not the leaders here, but in Oxfordshire, just to give an example of a School Streets programme, we've done 2 batches of 5 School Streets. The significant move recently is that the team in Oxfordshire, the officer team, have been given approval to go straight to ANPR rather than have volunteers to start them off. Is great, but they're still going to be doing them in batches of 5, maybe once, maybe twice a year. So we've got several hundred schools in Oxfordshire, so it's going to take decades at that rate to cover all of them. And you're right, a School Street has a moderate effect. Having a low traffic neighbourhood around the school has a much bigger effect, we've learnt even from the first few. So there is a lot more to do. Let's think. Ruth from Chiswick has a question about Clearway in Bristol. Sorry, the example is in Bristol, and this is whether the right. This is about having parking. This is about having clearways.
I ask it.
Yes, why don't you ask it, Ruth? You'll ask it more clearly than I will.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. No, we in the 70s, 80s, we had what were called clearways, and you were not allowed to park between 7 and 10, I think, and 4 and 7 in the afternoon. And I was filming in Bristol at the time, and no one could park on the roads going into Bristol, which meant people weren't cycling so much then, but it did make it much safer, and buses had more room. And I'm thinking of the Uxbridge Road and the Goldhall Road in Shepherd's Bush, where it's a free-for-all for parking 24/7. And of course, people aren't cycling it, and therefore people say, there you see, there's a painted cycle lane, no one uses it. But that's because it's full of cars. So have you investigated clearways? Pete? You're too young.
Well, I grew up in London, so it makes me think of red routes as an equivalent that still is in operation. I just think they tend to be on big main roads, and if we're going back to children, it still means children sharing space with buses, lorries, motor vehicles, cars, etc. And the vast majority of parents are going to be wary of their own behaviour, let alone their 7-year-old son or daughter to do that. So I still think predominantly, you want main roads to be physically protected, residential streets to be low trafficked in some way, and you want to improve the accessibility of off-road routes as much as you possibly can, and utilize them to make those connections to build your network. And it's the analogy that I was using in some of the media interviews last week is it's like driving to school or driving to the local shops and then suddenly the road's stopping and not being able to continue your journey. And that's I think until we get past that, it's going to be incredibly challenging. And yeah, I mean, examples that I point towards at the moment are places like Belgium, where Ghent and Leuven, where you've got circulation plans, where you've got cycle streets, where cars are not allowed to overtake cycles, where the direction of travel has changed every intersection, and they're clearly marked out. It's really kind of trying to change the culture. Side road crossings, I think, is another great example that it's low cost. It just needs legislation to make it possible, but it's super low cost. It's just zebra markings. It complies with the highway codes changes in 2022. And just starts to chip away at that culture of who has priority where, and giving more priority to people walking, wheeling, as much as possible. Right.
And as somebody's put in the chat, the clearways and the red routes are usually on busy roads. They're normally there to help the buses along, actually, and they're normally routes that are fairly hostile to cyclists, so that you've got that problem. And Darren is asking about investment. I mean, I could interpret that in two ways. Obviously, investment for the actual routes is Active Travel England or developers or such like. That's really not that's the perennial problem that we all face. But the survey, if I'm right, you mentioned Halfords in the blurb, so I presume that they have chipped in some money to help Sustrans to produce this, which is obviously good. They have an interest in children buying bikes, which is, but it's great to have a bit of commercial support for something like this.
It is, yeah. So they're the sponsor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, they sponsored the work. Made the launch happen. So we've got a campaign that's ongoing or about to start, which will be mainly consumer focused, and quite child focused in what we're trying to get across. So really kind of communicating with children about some of the findings and how children kind of perceive themselves within that. In May, we're holding a summit in Birmingham, which will bring together professionals from across the sector alongside 30 children from primary and secondary schools. So again, we want that. So that is almost an event where we're starting to design recommendations off the back of the report, but also off the back of the context, the lived experience of the children that will be in the room, co-creating those recommendations alongside the sector. We didn't want to just do something with adults. We want children to be present through this process.
That's great. And I know you're doing a similar process with disabled people and Transport for All. I don't know if you're personally involved in that, but Sustrans is.
Yes, I'm off to Oxford tomorrow to facilitate the second workshop for that. Yep.
I just talked to Wendy Hind, who's involved in that today. H, you had a question you were waving, so you're obviously keen to ask it. Find that mute button. Shall I do a quick... there we go. Oh, muted yourself again. You're muted. You're muted.
That's it. Got it.
So,
Sorry, it's working on the Android, and my My PC locked up and crashed, and it won't reboot. So
that's okay. Just ask the question.
right. Two things. First of all, Dr. Bob would have been saying, could we actually make it a risk-free route to school rather than a safe one? Because my kids were riding bikes to school when they were 9, and they rode until they went to secondary school. And because Leicestershire County Council didn't decide to put a culvert in where the little stream went underneath an embankment, they couldn't cycle to secondary school because they had to get round the roundabout, the dual carriageway and the exit from the motorway. So should we be looking at risk-free routes to school? And the lack of a subway was, if anybody's old enough, do they remember building Oxford Circus Station? And I'm very keen to see whether we could build grade-separated crossings by building a road over the original road and digging the hole underneath it. If you remember, Oxford Circus Station was built with Oxford Street and Regent Street still running over the top, whilst they built the subway. And perhaps we could move one of those around the country, so that everywhere people want a grade-separated road crossing, we just plant this thing, dig a hole underneath it, and Bob's your uncle.
I would love to dig grade-separated crossings in many, many places, H. I don't know if, Tim, you can comment on that. It's a long way from a survey, but it will provide a lot of solutions.
It's not really my expertise or area, but large roundabouts, and then you have, quite often quite poorly designed, hostile, quite scary environments to cross, especially underneath them. Certainly the ones in Bristol tend to flood a lot as well, so you get wet feet in the process. I just think we need to, it's not solving the issue of challenging car dominance as such. I think actually level crossings at street level that are purpose built, that give priority to people walking and wheeling and cycling are probably much better and much cheaper.
Just to say that I have actually built paths through flood arches on bridges. They go underwater about 1 week a year, but for 1 week a year, what the hell? I mean, the road to Lindisfarne goes under twice a day. And people
yes, but people don't go to school on Lindisfarne, as far as I know. Anyway, that's an interesting idea. Let's come back to a question which is actually about the index here from James Diamond, who is in Exeter, if I remember correctly. How often will the index be repeated? This is the first off. Do you have plans to develop it further?
I think the short answer is yes, in terms of plans, and probably no in terms of funding at this point in time. The adult index repeats every 2 years, so the desire would be to repeat the children's index every 2 years on the alternate year, if you see, and to keep it quite light touch, to not go down to city level, but to keep it as a UK publication. We're not going to be able to get the funding to go much beyond that. We want to do more with children and put children's lived experience at the fore of our agenda and what we do, what we advocate for, how we communicate, etc. So, the work that we've done with disabled people, the Disabled Citizens Inquiry, the current project that we briefly touched on in Oxford, is trying to do that with disabled people. I think there's a second stream focused on children that's in the offering around, how do we connect children's voices with decision makers as much as possible. So let's not just have that conversation with children and find out what their needs are, but let's have that conversation with children and decision makers in the same room, and let's get children's voices in front of, or alongside plans, strategies, and investment and schemes as and when they're starting to happen.
Yes, that's good. And he raises, one of the examples he gives is, could you expand it to include disabled children's travel and experience? And I know that's one of the demographic segments you include, and it's quite interesting how there is a small difference in use of walking or wheeling and cycling, but it's perhaps not as large as you would expect. And of course, disabled covers a wide range, but not a huge difference. And then a question from Peter. Sorry to root these all through me, but it means we don't get to ask you more questions. It's about children cycling to secondary school, and he sees them usually cycling on the pavement, even when the roads are quiet. And he's wondering if the survey casts any light on this. Whether there were any questions, or whether you found any evidence that children are reluctant to ride on the road, and should facilities be designed in mind of that?
I mean, it's not something that the index addressed. It's not something that I have any real knowledge other than, you know, what we all see on a day-to-day basis in our areas. I mean, if you apply it to adults, generally speaking, adults cycle on the pavement where the road is hostile and they feel threatened and unsafe. So I'd expect that to also apply to children as well. But yeah, it's something possibly to be explored further.
Yes, and I think probably like most people here, we have the same observed experience. Children and probably you'd say less confident cyclists will tend towards the pavement, and even the braver ones will tend towards the pavement as the road gets more and more hostile. One of the things I did notice that surprised me, I'll see what surprised you. The thing that surprised me looking at it was the cycling rates were higher for ethnic minorities than they were for white people, and I discussed that in a WhatsApp chat group, as you do, and somebody suggested that might be the urban factor, in that there's more Black and Asian people in urban areas, but that wasn't there wasn't a kind of urban, rural, city, countryside cut visible. I don't know, is that something you've spotted and have looked at all?
It's a really interesting point, and I think one of the reasons why we haven't, and this is probably my bad, on the adult index, explored the points of view or done a specific project focused on people of colour or ethnic minorities so much is because actually participation doesn't tend to be as different as you expect. Whether that's because people of colour are much more likely to be based in urban areas where things are closer and there's more opportunity to walk, wheel, cycle, etc. I honestly don't know, and it's something that we should really kind of look into more. But yeah, we don't tend to see that both for the adults or as you rightly said for children. But explaining that and understanding that better is something. But it's been consistent over the last 5-6 years from the adult index that those differences that you see quite starkly for gender, quite starkly for disability in particular, and quite starkly for certain ages, don't come out so much in the data around people of colour versus the white population.
Yeah, and so maybe there's something that is looking at some of the other parts of the regular cycle and walking index focus mostly on cities as well. So there's a question slightly related to that. Mark asks, does the index look at statutory bus pass distances, which is an interesting cut on this, because I think he's thinking more than 3 miles, less than 3 miles, if I remember correctly. That's probably not a question you asked.
It's not a question that we asked. We are starting to explore a little bit more, and that project that we keep coming back to, the Oxford project Transforming Mobility, which is on the go at the moment, is addressing this a little bit as well. Is how active travel integrates with other modes, and how we. So I think at Sustrans we recognise that take Greater Manchester for example, and the B-Lines network, taking that under public control, the increase in patronage, the increase in revenue, therefore that supports those services. That you can't have an increase. I think it's between 5 and 10% in bus patronage, and then not have a knock-on impact upon an increase in walking and wheeling behaviour, potentially some cycling behaviours as well. So, I think it's trying to bring those stories together, trying to show how we can better integrate active travel with public transport to create genuine, seamless, efficient, convenient, reliable, affordable, accessible journeys, as opposed to a car. Car transport is really critical. So yeah, we haven't gone into that level of detail, but we're starting to explore a little bit more on the public transport side because of the need to, I think, from an active travel perspective, just as much as anything else.
Yeah, yeah. And one final question, then we'll wrap it, I think, which is about locally focused surveys, which is a question about whether it would be possible to develop a toolkit to help local groups conduct similar surveys, which might be as simple as making some of the questions available so we could carry out some consistent surveys. That's obviously there's questions about how you deliver them and sample size and so forth.
Yep.
You've obviously used YouGov and their omnibus survey, which is a relatively cost-efficient way of doing a reasonable national sample size.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point actually. So yes, they're costly. YouGov is a lot cheaper than the main index survey. That's for sure, which is randomized online. But the YouGov survey has the advantage of being accessible for children, which is really helpful.
Yes.
The locally focused survey, I mean, for me, the single most important thing of a locally focused survey or any survey is representation. We live, as you all know, in a massively polarized society. We tend to overlook the people that don't talk, and you get this kind of screaming match from one side to the other. And quite often we can be complacent in that, I think, as well. That's one of the reasons for the Transform Mobility Project is to let children and disabled people speak for themselves, rather than pretending that we know all disabled people and therefore kind of advocating for them that it's going to be better if we do this and this for active travel. So making sure you have representation, I think, is almost more important than sample size. You can go out and speak to a whole bunch of people that want to speak to you because they love cycling, but the robustness and the how that survey really stacks up from the point of view of a decision maker that understands a few first principles of surveys, I think, then comes undone. So trying to make sure that you can relate that to the population, that it has an equal split of gender, that has 20% of your respondents have a long-term condition or impairment, finding out the proportion of people of color in it's just applying some of those basic representation weighting measures to make it stack up is helpful. We publish most of our questions, I think, online. So the adult index definitely has a methodology paper with the questions in it, and the children's index, if it doesn't already, that's something that we need to just get out online, and I can share the survey. We're not privy to that. People that do similar surveys and repeat our questions, that's great, so we can understand what's going on locally.
Okay, that's great. And the points you make about getting the a representative survey as opposed to just the people who want to talk to you is also well made in Active Travel England's recent paper on, I can't remember what it's called, but it's guidance for consultation and engagement that they produced in the last month or so. Makes that point very well. Thank you very much, Tim. That was really good session, really good to have you talk about that and answer so many questions for us. Very good discussion talk about that. And so thank you very much, and we will be back again as ever next week. Thank you all for coming to listen to Tim and learn about the Sustrans Children's Walking and Cycling Index. I hope that's useful in increasing your knowledge of what children are interested in, which is a lot more cycling, a lot more walking, a lot less sitting in the car, actually, they don't want to sit less in the car. They're quite happy to be driven around, but they do want to cycle and walk more. And that will be a useful campaigning tool or a useful knowledge tool for a lot of us. Next week, we will be having a talk by Steve Maybe, who is from Digital Urbanism, and from Ben Martin, who is the Associate Director of Planning and Infrastructure and Economy at Watford Borough Council, and they will be talking about some of their award-winning active travel engagement tools using gamification and virtual reality to simulate behavioural change. So another exciting session next week. I believe Roxanne DeBow is going to be in charge, so should be another great session, and I will see you in the audience next week.